Welcome to A Tale of Two Scribes. I'm your host, Eric P. Bishop. This is a podcast where interesting people come and tell about the stories they've crafted. As for myself, I'm an author. I've created novels, short stories, novellas, and even poetry. If you'd like to find out more about what I've done, please go to my website, ericpbishop.com. Thanks, and enjoy the journey. Welcome to another episode of A Tale of Two Scribes. Tonight, I have best-selling author Stephen England here. Hey, Stephen, how are you?
Hello, Eric. Thanks for having me on. It's good to be
Yeah.
here.
It's good to actually talk with you. It's funny the
Likewise.
way the digital world works now because I've interacted with you on I believe Facebook more than anything, and you feel like you know someone or know something about someone, and then but in reality, a lot of times you never talk to anybody. Like in the fellow writers, like there's tons of
Yeah,
writers I've never talked to, and it's so this is a great medium to get to actually put a face with the name. So.
yeah, for sure. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. So let's take it back to more the beginning of what got you into the glorious field of writing.
Well, I think a lot of credit has to go to my parents. They instilled a love of reading in me from a very, very early age, and probably then wondered what on earth they had done. Because I became a voracious reader, and I was blessed from a fairly early age with ability to speed read, and re- re- with decent retention, and the result is, yeah, I plow through book
Yeah.
at a pretty good pace, which is good because even at the pace I do hit, it's probably going to. I already own more books than I will finish in the rest of my life. So,
I have a few on my shelf I need to read one day. So
yeah, I have your book on my Kindle, which I need to get to, and I have not yet, but one of these days.
no harm, no foul on that. So I hate to think how many are on my Kindle, and I've just someone reached out to me the other day wanted me to help for one of the conferences that I'm not going to
Mm,
this summer if I wanted to judge. And I'm like, okay, give me some details. Like, well, it's only the first 50 pages. You really don't have to agree to
mm.
two. If you want more than two, we'll give you more. And I'm like, okay, how quick will it take me to read 50 pages and like absorb it, not just read
Yeah,
for speed
yeah,
reading. I got to actually be able to
yeah.
like mark down at the end what I think about this. So I started the first sample last night and I'm about 20 pages in. So maybe tonight I'll
Mm.
finish that one. And
Okay, yeah, yeah.
yeah, but the interesting part of that too is it gives me the opportunity to be exposed to things I might not normally read.
Right. I like that as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Which can be a double-edged sword. I did something like this similar. We talked offline about conferences. Years back, I attended about 3 years in a row. I attended Thriller Fest in New York City, and I think it was the second year. I befriended someone the first year, and they're like, "Hey, they I think they judge for like new undiscovered authors or something like that. I can't
Okay, yeah.
and they're like, "Hey, would you like to help?" And I'm just wanting to be helpful. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, we'll start sending you stuff. Oh, like I don't even know how many books it was. And so I reach out once, and you got like 4 months to read this like mountain of books. And so I reach
Yeah.
back out to this guy. I won't name his name because I'm still friends with him. We actually often and get together, but I'm like, so there's no way in God's green earth I'm going to read all these books. And he goes, no, 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 don't. He said, if you hit typos in the first page and you got sentence structure or
Mm,
whatever, just put it aside and grab the next one. And I was like, seriously? He goes, yeah, I just need like your top five.
gotcha.
You don't
Okay.
have to finish them. I was like, cool, I can read the first chapter and the last chapter. All right. So
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
but again, it was a good experience. It was a good experience to
Yeah,
it was interesting to see what people because it kind of taught me a lesson that I didn't yet learn because I hadn't gone the self-publishing route at that point. It was interesting to see what people submit for contests or for whatever and how bad I hate to say it, but how bad they can be in the sense of not a bad story, but
no,
man, if you're submitting something, and especially if you're going to try to get an agent or trying to, go to a publisher that doesn't require agents, man, if you submit something that's got a typo or two typos on the first page, you're
yeah,
sunk. They're not going to give you the time of day.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
So, yeah, so it's
Yeah,
interesting.
but
But yeah,
yeah,
so
but
I want to read more, but man, it's always a challenge.
Yeah. But yeah, that's really kind of how I got into it. I love to read,
Mhm.
and eventually found the thriller genre largely through Clive Cussler and Tom Clancy, and that really kicked me off in that direction. I was 11 years old when 9/11 happened, so
Okay.
that was a very watershed moment in my childhood,
Mhm.
and caused me to really take a more serious look at what the genre looked like in that environment in the modern day, and really then by the time I spent most of my teen years writing and throwing manuscripts in the trash. So by the time I was actually felt like I had something worth publishing, I also kind of felt like I had something worth saying, and
Mhm.
continue to pursue it. And here we are. I published first book of my series in summer 2011, and
Mhm.
still writing it now 13 years later. So
Yeah, it's amazing. It's
yeah,
amazing.
it's kind of surreal to me to realize it's been that long. But yeah,
Yeah. I finished my first novel in 2014. So actually, well, we're in June. So I started
yeah,
that novel, June 19th, June 26th. I can't remember now. It's been 10 years, but I started that first novel in June, and I wrapped it up in September of that year.
yeah,
And that
okay.
one I remember because I was in Yosemite. I actually had figured a way. I was going for a work trip, and I figured a way that I could have most of the book done by the time I got there. And then I just wanted to write in Yosemite. I wanted to hike, but what I found is I had like 2, 3 chapters to finish writing, and I was
Gotcha.
1 full day in Yosemite. And so I kind of got there super early in the morning. I went out to one of the waterfalls it was dry season. So I sat at the base of one of the waterfalls that was just trickling at that point. I wrote until my
Very
butt
nice.
hurt from sitting on the rock. And I think my computer started getting low. So then I went to the cafe that they have in Yosemite Village. I wrote there, let everything charge up. And then I went to a different part of the park to write like those last couple pages.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and and then I thought, like every author does, okay, here comes fame, fortune, Hollywood. I mean, it's easy street is around the corner.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I, I
So
realized
how many millions are you on now?
Yeah, I realized that that street had a lot of potholes, broken down vehicles that were burning, people shooting at me.
Yep.
It turned into a part of town I didn't want to be in.
Dumpsters on fire. So
I was the dumpster on fire at that point. Well, and I think I
fair
went into
enough.
it, and you probably did too. You went into it much younger than I did. I was writing my first novel. I was 37, 30, yeah, 37, I guess, is
Yeah,
what I was when I first, yeah, I wrote before that, but when I actually like
right.
took it serious and completed a novel, I was 37. Um, and I was completely naive. I thought you write a novel, you send it off to an agent, and it can't be that hard. And I wasn't that naive to think, okay, fame, fortune, all the stuff I joke about,
Yeah, yeah.
but I didn't realize the business side of it. And I didn't know,
Right. Yeah.
like, and I've mentioned this, I think, on some other shows. One of the agents that was kind about the response they gave me in a way of they liked what I was writing, but they were, more curious about what's your social media presence. How many
Yeah.
Twitter followers do you have? Where's your website? You don't have a website. And I'm like, no, I don't need any of that stuff. And they're like, yeah, call us back when you actually establish yourself. And at the time, that
Yeah,
seemed counterintuitive to me because it's like, well, if you don't have a book like out, how do you build a presence for something that doesn't
right.
necessarily
Yeah.
exist besides on your computer? Um, so I
Yeah.
started down the path that a lot of us go down, and it's like, okay, I opened a Facebook account, and I think I'd had a Facebook account years before that, and realized how silly it was, and got rid of it, disabled it. So start a new Facebook page, open a Twitter account, and I think years later I started Instagram and stuff. But yeah, it was the Ferrari's
Yeah.
still not in the driveway, Steven. I don't know what's up with that. So
Yeah. Oh, it's sitting in mine, so I mean, it just got lost on the way to you.
I'm
I
glad
wish.
someone got it.
I wish, but but yeah, I think for me it was interesting because I actually had fairly low expectations
Okay.
going into the writing business, and really didn't. I very much had a story I wanted to tell. I had read the genre for over a decade at that point and kind of knew, well, probably right about a decade to be,
Mhm.
now that I'm thinking of the dates, but I kind of knew, here's what I like about the genre, here's what I don't like about it, here's what I would want to do differently, and I'm going to do it.
Yep.
But I didn't really expect that it would go anywhere beyond just being a fun hobby for me.
Okay.
And I really hit kind of, I would say, the second wave of the indie self-publishing
Hmm.
movement. I missed the first wave where guys like Hugh Howey and J.A. Conrath and a bunch got their start. But I hit the second wave, and that first book took off in the spring of 2012, and really Pandora's Grave vastly performed my expectations for it. I mean, it was going gangbusters that spring and summer, but I did not have the second book anywhere remotely close to being done.
Okay.
And so I've ridden some interesting, ridden an interesting roller coaster in the last decade of,
Hmm.
okay, I'm doing really well, I'm doing really well, I need another book. Oh, I don't have another book, and then I'm a painfully slow writer, partly because I'm a painfully complicated writer. Uh, and then it's like, okay, well, I get the book out 6 months after it would have been commercially useful to have the book out.
Right.
Which, I mean, I can't say I feel too badly about that because people, once they read those books, are like, oh, yes, we really love this book. It's a great story. It is something kind of different and unique. And I'm glad I didn't cut corners to get it out
Right.
before when it might not have been as good. But
Yeah.
at the same time, that's kind of been the roller coaster of, okay, well, it's not quite there yet.
Yep.
But here I am, 13 years into it, and I'm working on the 13th title in the Shadow Warrior series. So
Okay.
it's not been inconsistent either. So
No, no. If you're able to, well, if you're able to do really what the big publishers do, which is one book a year, um, that's standard. I mean, and there's some authors that are can push out, and especially if they can build a self-publishing business into a viable
yeah,
financial success, whatever that means for them. They might be able to put out a book every couple months, or I know there's some people that we
yeah,
follow even in some of the groups we're part of on Facebook that these guys are knocking a book out a month. uh,
yeah.
I
I, I've
I couldn't.
uh, yeah, I've joked that I could write a lot faster than I currently do if I didn't actually have to research anything.
It's not a
But
joke. That's true.
but the reality is the research itself.
Yeah.
I often do research as I go along, so it's not like I have a research phase and then a writing phase. I'm a notorious pantser, but yep,
Right here.
represent.
Represent. Absolutely.
but but yeah, I mean the research itself will take me a few months of the process once
Mhm.
you make it cumulative. So yeah, I'd never be able to hit the speeds I see some people do. But hey, I mean that's
Do you write more
ultimately
in the morning or the evening? Do you have a time preference of when you get to write, or?
it really depends.
Okay.
I've had a number of different schedules through the years, and got married a couple years ago, so that's changed my life and routines,
Yep.
as you might imagine.
That does happen.
It's been a wonderful thing too, though. My wife's a lot more geared toward the data side of the business than I am, so
Okay.
that's that's been a blessing.
Yeah, that is a blessing.
Uh, but but yeah, so my routines have shifted a lot, but yeah, just the research side of things is monumental, and yet
Hmm.
at the same time, I really don't know that I could tell the stories. Oh, I know I could tell the stories I do without it, because people often will ask me, "Well, where do you get your ideas?" I'm like, research. I mean,
Hmm.
I I research what's happened in the real world, and I say, well, what if it happened this way, or what if it happened that way, or what if this this particular thing, what if these two things came together, and
Hmm.
just I often joke that the great thing about real life is real life can't sue you for plagiarism. So you just you just look at what's happened and be like, well, okay, well, what if we got into what if we got into the meat of this?
Yes, exactly.
So, and I think that's one thing that really appeals to me about the genre is that you can you can delve into a world that most people only know by what they see on the news or what they read on
Mhm.
social media,
Right.
and you can delve into it at a level that they are not getting because they don't have the specialized resources that you know how to access, or people that you have come to know through the years. You can go talk to them, and sometimes it's people who are in sensitive positions, and you're
Mhm.
like, okay, I know you can't tell me anything, however, could you give me a list of open source things I should read?
Right.
And that way you kind of know, okay, this stuff is reasonably credible, I can work from it and go from there. And then you try to distill that down into a story.
Hmm.
And if you do your job right, people can walk away from your story knowing more about what you wrote about than
Right.
they are likely to ever actually get anywhere else.
Yeah.
I really a book I wrote a couple years ago, The Lion's Paw, is set in the Syrian civil war,
Okay.
and I had a number of people message me or email me after that book, just like, "Wow, I didn't know this about the Syrian civil war. I didn't know that, or I had no real grasp of this, how this conflict unfolded." I'm like, "Okay, well, I'm doing my job."
Right.
Because they are aspects of our world that are important to understand at some level,
Hmm.
and yet they're often very misunderstood. In
Right.
fact, I've often said that I'll start out with the germ of an idea for a story, and I'll think, oh yeah, I know what happened here. I understand this event. Probably a classic example would be a novel I wrote a handful of years ago that's set in Iraq during the surge and during the Anbar Awakening.
Okay.
And I wove a thriller story into into
Hmm.
those real life events. And when I set out to do that, I was like, oh yeah, I understand what happened here. And I start doing the research, and like, no, no, I did not understand this
Yeah.
whatsoever.
Do you think you didn't understand it because the data you had before you started was just what mainstream media had put out there, and that's all you had really heard about the event? Or
No, I mean, I'd done some more in-depth reading on it. I think
okay,
as it was just largely superficial.
okay, gotcha.
Or let me back up and rephrase that. I think understanding the event on a broad, superficial is probably a little harsh, but understanding the event on a broad level
Hmm.
did not enable me whatsoever to understand it with the granularity I needed to write about it.
Yeah.
And at once I had delved into it at that granularity, my viewpoint of the big picture changed completely. Uh, so yeah, I wouldn't say that what I had understood before was wrong. It
Yeah.
just was very insufficient.
Well, and I think part of
Uh,
it, considering of where when you're writing that story in the location you are, as Americans, we don't have a great understanding of how the cultures work in other countries. We have a
yeah,
high level maybe, but especially so I had a friend that actually went to college with. He ended up dropping out of college, joining the army, and he did, I don't even know, I used to know how many tours he did in Iraq, but between
yeah,
Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Lebanon, I mean, he spent a 20-year, because he went, after 9/11, he spent
yeah,
a 20-year career in the Middle East in one form or
yeah,
another, and not 3-month deployments. He was over there 6 to 8 months a pop frequently. He'd come home for a month or two, and then he'd of course be signing up too. He wasn't married, didn't have family. So
yeah,
he'd come back and he would kind of like tell me some stuff or show me pictures he wasn't supposed to show me or have stories I know that I had to like keep quiet until he retired, basically, and still keep quiet. But as he kind of explained the cultural stuff to me, it kind of opened my eyes. And I'd say for maybe for the United States, the closest parallel we have is how maybe like Southerners relate to people from New York City or whatever. You know, they the culture is very different, except over there it's stronger than that, and there's a tribal element, you know, where especially like Iraq, you know,
Yeah,
northern
and
Iraq is its own entity, and there's no love for people that live in, you know, Mosul or Baghdad or whatever, and it's
and
kind of
it's a lot
crazy.
more geographically confined than the U.S. as well.
Yes,
Just
100%.
oh, but yeah, and I think that's the interesting burden of being a writer is you want to bring people in with an understanding and you want
Mm,
to create characters that are sympathetic, even if the reader walks away like, okay, well, I don't agree with that person or I don't see things as they do.
right.
You want to try to bring them in a way that they can understand a little bit more of, okay, this is why this person is the way they are.
Hmm.
I found it was very interesting actually reading that, excuse me, writing that book. Uh, for one thing, I had research sources like I don't think I've ever had probably writing any other book.
Okay.
I was down in DC visiting a friend of mine who worked for a think tank, and
Mm,
I was there. We'd gone out to lunch. We were back at his office. We were talking. I was like, well, I said, I've got this. I said, Philip, I've got this book I want to write, but I said, I just don't really know how to go about starting the research on it because I said, I've got readers who were there in Iraq at the time, so I
hmm.
really want to be sure I get this right,
Get it right.
like I've never gotten it before.
Right.
And I was like, what? Where would you recommend I start? And he looks at me and he's like, come with me.
Oh no.
Okay. So we walked like two doors down. He knocks on this office door and he door opens. He's like, "Hey," he said, "I'd like you to meet my friend Stephen England." He said, he introduces me to the guy. He said, he was our tribal liaison officer with the tribes in Anbar during 2007, 2008. I'm like,
Wow.
okay, so I'm literally now standing in front of someone who is in the meetings that I'll be writing about.
Yep.
And yeah, he pointed me and all. We had any number of phone conversations where we talked things over. He pointed me in the direction of a lot of really great resources.
Hmm.
But yeah, it was really fascinating to be able to talk with someone who was in the meetings with
Yeah.
people I was basing characters off.
Right.
Uh, but I really found one of the sources he pointed me. Well, I think I found them from a source he had pointed me toward. But there was a couple volume set of interviews that the U.S. Marine Corps did
Okay.
with Marines who were in Anbar at the time, and then with Iraqis who
Hmm.
lived in Anbar at the time of the surge and the Anbar awakening with the tribal militias. And it was fascinating because you got a lot of really in-depth, gritty detail,
Hmm.
a lot of which I adapted for the story. Like there's an anecdote in the story where my main character, Harry Nichols, who's the series protagonist, but
Hmm.
he's a CIA operations officer and he's there in Anbar working with the tribes. And he has this meeting with this tribal leader who freely confesses that he fought against the U.S. in the opening years of the invasion,
Of the war, yeah.
and he very cheerfully is like, "Oh yeah, I fought against you all." At that point, he still shows the bullet wounds from it and so forth. But he's gotten sick of Al Qaeda.
Hmm.
Uh, Al Qaeda really cracked down on the tribes, particularly a lot of the alcohol and cigarette smuggling that the
Hmm.
tribes were known to do, and they're just like, whoa, wait a minute, this isn't the Islam we know. What is this?
Right.
And eventually realized that the U.S. was by far the lesser of the two evils. And but he tells Harry, he's talking with him, and he talks about how bad things had gotten and how he had at one point put a rifle, an AK-47, on his kitchen table with one
Mhm.
bullet in the chamber, and told his like 5-year-old son, if anything I'm going to go to sleep. If anything happens, you reach up and you pull the trigger of that rifle, and the gunshot will wake me up.
Wow.
And that moment in the book is drawn directly out of an interview with an Iraqi in similar one of the leaders of the awakening. So
Yep.
there were a lot of really interesting details like that that I kind of fit into the story because I wanted readers to think, okay, what if I don't have a lot in common with this guy in terms of background, in terms of ideology, outlook, anything? Well, what
Mhm.
if that was me and I was under such physical threat that I had to tell my 5-year-old to do
Right.
that? Oh, I mean, that's what these people were laying on the line.
Yeah.
So that there was a lot of really, really fascinating stuff like that.
Mhm.
And yet what really struck me, the book itself ends on, it's called Archangel. The book itself ends on a more upbeat note than some of my writing. But what really saddened me, and I mentioned it in the author's note of that book,
Mhm.
that the tone of a lot of the interviews was really upbeat because a lot of them were conducted in 2009 after the
Okay.
surge had succeeded,
Mhm.
after Iraq was in a reasonably good place, and people were very optimistic.
Mhm.
And I basically write in the author's note at the end of that book, just like, okay, but here's what happened
Right.
when the Islamic State comes in. And basically, I give the name of the guy who is the real individual upon which this fictional Iraqi tribal leader in the book is based.
Okay.
I took some liberties with his biographical details in the story,
Mhm.
but I give the name of the guy who he was based upon, and I'm
Mhm.
like, so here's what happened.
Mhm.
And in 2013, he was I think elected to the Iraqi parliament
Okay.
and was fairly successful in representing Anbar.
Mhm.
And then in 2013, he was visiting, I think, one of the tribal villages under his responsibility, and he got out of his car, and a guy walked up to him and greeted him with a hug, and the guy was wearing an S vest, and
Mm.
that was the end of that. And
Wow.
I mean, there were a lot of issues with that particular leader. He had his he was not exactly a knight in shining armor, but
Mhm.
he still put his life and that of his family on the line
Yeah.
when many other people were not. And
Right.
so you come to respect him throughout the story for what he is.
Yep.
And yet then I'm like, yeah, but the guy in real life, this does not have a happy ending.
You
Which
walk
is
that fine line of wanting to tell a good story, but also, yeah, you can't. You almost. I mean, you look at the news, pick up newspapers, whatever.
yeah,
Life can be really, really hard and really rough for a lot
yeah.
of people, and it's good to allude to that, but you also want to give people hope as well. Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so.
I think there can at least be something inspirational with
Mhm.
when you see people who are willing to take a stand and do the right thing, even if they know it's probably not going to end well for them.
Yeah, that was the
There's a
founding
scene.
of our country right there. I mean, look, I mean,
Exactly.
and of
Yeah.
course now we're kind of dogging a lot of those people, and we're like, yeah, do you know they might have taken a few risks for the lifestyle you have. You might want to be
Yeah,
careful with that one.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, there's a scene which again was pretty much drawn directly out of an interview. There's a scene toward the end of that book where he basically, my protagonist, Harry Nichols, is giving him an out, basically saying,
Mhm.
"Look, if you want to come to the U.S., we can give you citizenship. We can ensure that your family comes out with you, that you're taken care of."
Right.
And the tribal leader basically just looks at him and says, "Yes, but this is my home."
Yeah.
And the people in my village, they did not come to my brothers, they came to me,
Right.
and I owe it to them not to run now.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much, again, like I said, drawn directly out of an interview.
Right.
And yeah, yeah, he knew in doing that he could save himself,
Hmm.
and if he stayed it would not end well, but
Right.
honor demanded something different.
Honor demanded it. Yeah. which is something I think we struggle with here.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's a cultural thing. Our republic is not that old, and they also don't have long lifespans either, the ones that have occurred in the past. So you've
Yeah.
got societies over there that have been around literally for millennia, and I don't know
Yeah.
if you've been to Europe. I'm been about 18 months since I've been. I'm going back here
No, nice.
in a few months. But every time I'm over there, I walk some of these streets, and yeah, I've been fortunate to go in places like the Colosseum and places in Paris and really really in a lot of different places. But it strikes me when I'm there most of the time that you know these buildings were around 1,000+ years before anything was around noticeable in our country,
Yeah.
and we'll still be here after we tear down the rest of our stadiums and all of our other stuff and rebuild them every 20 years. But
Yeah.
just the significance of how things do work different in other parts of the world and in our Western
Yeah.
minds. I think a lot of times we have tunnel vision, and we think, well, this is how everyone else should live. We not again, we're avoiding politics with the interview and stuff, but in talking about that part of the world and what happened after 9/11, Americans in general had the blinders on of, okay, well, we need to get this particular part of the world to see our vantage point. It's like maybe they want us to see their vantage point, you know?
Yeah. Well, it's one of those challenges of, yeah, there's a lot of things about Middle Eastern society that we justly find reprehensible, and
Right.
there's aspects of that view of honor that are really really dark and
Yep.
tragic. And yet, I think the thing we failed to realize, like you say, after 9/11, is that just because we do very rightly see the things that are wrong in the way
Hmm.
people in those societies are treat treat each other, it's they still what we did not understand is that this society is more or less working for the society.
Right.
And that's not to say it's good per se.
Hmm.
It is to say that we're crashing in with our ready-made society, like, here's the way things should work. And they're like, yes, but this has actually worked for us for several thousand years at this point. Who are
Exactly.
you?
Yep.
Oh, and like I say, that's not really to make a moral judgment. It's just to
Hmm.
say that they have their way of viewing it, and you're not going to change that overnight.
Yeah.
I think one of the best authors I've read in terms of the genre who captures that is, excuse me, is Matt Critchio. His novel
Okay.
Security Day. He's a former, I think I want to say he was in Navy intelligence, but he spent time in Afghanistan. And
Okay.
his novel, man, my voice is not great tonight. His novel Security Day is far more than any other thriller I've ever read, told from the Afghan point of view.
Okay. Interesting.
And it's really striking in the way that he portrays Afghan culture and the war in Afghanistan more from that
Hmm.
viewpoint that's not. I think it'd be fair to say it's alien to most U.S. readers.
Right.
Uh, it's really really good. It's one of when I was on Spyberry podcast last spring, and I chose it as like my top one of my top five books that
Hmm.
I wanted to felt people should know
There.
about in the
Yeah.
genre. So yeah. Oh, yeah.
What let's talk about publishing and talking about the
Yeah, for
direction you
sure.
went. Was there di- you obviously you started reading pretty intensely at a young age and then started writing at still at reasonably, probably what, early 20s, late
Oh
teens?
no, I was writing by my early to mid teens. So
Okay,
yeah,
so early to mid-teens.
yeah.
Um, did you think of going traditional at any point, or did you always think I'm just going to go more indie, or was there a thought process there?
Well, I think that some of that comes back to my very low expectations going into the business.
Okay.
But I mean, when I started out and writing, indie was not really a thing beyond the vanity presses.
Right.
Uh, so I think I always more or less thought I would go some version of traditional, but
Mhm.
I did not have any real big expectations for that
Yeah.
in terms of to what extent what I wanted to write would appeal to a
Mhm.
traditional publisher, to what extent I'd actually be able to get it in front of someone who would give it a chance.
Yeah.
And so I think when I realized that indie publishing was an option, I kind of took that as maybe I could call it the coward's way out of, well, I'll just take this really low risk way of just
Mhm.
I'll put it out there and see if
We'll see
anybody
what
likes it.
happens. Yeah.
And ultimately, then once I got it going and it was receiving a good reception, at that point it was just like, well, why do anything else? I mean,
Right.
it's working.
If it's
Why?
working, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I think for people listening to what you have to know, and you can pivot at any point. It's not like
oh yeah,
once you start
yeah,
down a path, you have to stay on that path. There's multiple ways for people to say, you know what, I've tried indie, I don't want to do it anymore. I want to go
yeah.
traditional, or even, I mean, traditional will a lot of times push people to indie because the traditional model will itself tell you you're done.
Yeah.
I was telling
I,
someone a story recently, and I didn't. I used the name when I was talking to the person. I wouldn't use it on the podcast, but I know someone that got a deal with a big name publisher, um, uh, an imprint that everyone listening or anyone in the thriller genre would know if I mentioned who the imprint was. And their first book came out, and it sold really well. Great, that's an awesome thing. That's something to be applauded. Second book came out, didn't sell quite as well.
yeah,
Third book came out, sold even less than the second. That's it. You had a four.
yeah.
I think it started as if I recall the details. It's been years. I think it started as a two-book deal. First one did so well, they
Mm,
immediately added on a third and fourth.
yeah,
But
yeah,
by the time that third came out and that was doing, they honored the agreement and kept the fourth. But as soon as that fourth was done, this person was
yeah,
done. And
yeah. I think that was really I knew enough about the publishing industry when I set out that that was one thing that I think pushed me, like I say, is maybe a little bit of the coward's way out into indie publishing. Is
Mhm.
I was very concerned. Because I had seen some of that sort of thing happen where
Right.
someone goes into it and they have a couple books and then they're kind of cut off and they don't really have the. I know any number of things have changed, even over just the last 5 years, let alone the last
Mhm.
15. But what I was seeing at the time was issues where authors then did not fully own the rights to that character
Right.
or that setting, and then they really couldn't do anything more with that
Yep.
universe. And I'm like, I'm very passionate about wanting to tell this specific story, this specific series, so forth. I really don't want to jeopardize my ability to continue that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, which I know some things along those lines have changed. There's sometimes deals that can be negotiated and this, that, and the other,
Yeah,
but
there
you
is.
still don't you still run that risk more or less.
So
So
I can speak of that one from experience. So I wrote my first book, like I said, 2014. Didn't get published. Wrote a second book, or didn't get even picked up by an agent. Wrote a second book. In the meantime, while I'm waiting for the agent, then once the first one wasn't getting picked representation, I started pitching the second one. Went all the way to a third one, and finally, I wrote my fourth book, which is behind me now, The Body Man, and that got me. And I went to a smaller publisher. I tried traditional,
yeah.
going through an agent, and I had a couple agents that, man, I thought I had, and I thought, man, we're
Mm,
going to get a deal with this, and it didn't happen. So I kind of reached that pivot point, and I knew a lot of people in the industry, successful authors, New York Times bestsellers. And they said, well, have you looked at any smaller publishers? And at the time I was like, no, I don't want to deal with that. And I did. The first small publisher I went with, offered me a contract almost immediately, within a week, whatever it was, very quickly. I took it because I think at that point I had been so long trying. At that point, I was like
yeah,
6 years in of trying to get
yeah,
published, and didn't really know what I was. signing, honestly, and that's my ignorance,
Yeah.
not the publisher. Um, and did not sold really well. The first book did well, but did not have a great relationship with the publisher.
Mm,
The second
gotcha.
book, which is that's one's behind me too. That one I'm putting out under my own now because the second one got rejected by the publisher, which
Mm.
no issue. I mean, if anything, I think a lot of us deal with imposter syndrome. We don't think what we write is really good. But I knew
Yeah,
that second
definitely.
book was really good, and I had like some really big name authors read it, and they said it was really good. And I went back to them, and I'm like, this, and I sent the rejection straight to them. I said, "Why did you lie to me?" No, I didn't say it that way, but it's like, what am I missing here? And their
Yeah.
response was, "This they don't know what they're talking about. That's
Mm.
wrong. It's wrong. You're right.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
is that good."
yeah,
And so then it became this thing of, well, okay, well, what do I do? And I thought about it. It wasn't an overnight thing to think about, but what I ended up coming back was saying is like, I'm not rewriting it for you. I believe in the
yeah,
story. And by then I had kind of learned the contract a lot better. And I said, per the contract, um, I want out. I want done. I want the
yeah.
rights back. And we ended up settling with them continuing to put the Body Man out and me having the rights back for any of the future books.
Gotcha. Yeah,
And within 6 months of that, the publisher went out of business, and I got the rights back anyways for the Body Man without any strings attached. And then
yeah.
at that point, I had already started building the network for self-publishing Breach of Trust, and I said, well,
Hmm.
let's get. And I was putting a novella out to kind of learn the market of cover,
Right.
all the different steps you have to do, and then so I built that up to know what I was doing. I said, well, let's get the Body Man out, and so that's what I did this year in January. Was I put the Body Man out under my own brand, and I had everything then in place to put Breach of Trust out, which is coming out June 18th.
Yeah.
But it was, man, it was crazy. It was brutal, and it's what I tell people is you don't know what you don't know. So I had
Yeah.
people when I signed that deal, I had multiple authors that were legit, well-known selling authors that said, "Hey, you've tried for a while. This isn't the best deal, but it's not the worst deal." And then I had a couple
Right.
authors be like, "Don't do it. Hold out. Go find a bigger one." It's like, yeah, but I've been pitching this story for a year and a half now, and I think
Yeah.
that's where authors kind of get that struggle of knowing what to do is the business side of the big five publishers is you could write a book and then you might be waiting 4 years before that book is in someone's hand. That's not out of the realm of possibility. But
Which is particularly challenging in our genre that does tend to kind of ride on the headlines and be like, okay, well, what's going on in the world? What are we
right,
writing about? And it's like, okay, this story could be very different in 4 years.
exactly.
Oh, which I don't think bothers me as much now as it did when I first started. I was very
Mhm.
kind of interested in kind of the over the horizon sort of perspective when I started out.
Right.
I'm really not at this point because I've realized, like I say, with the story set in Iraq back in 2007,
Hmm.
I've realized that I don't actually have to try to anticipate the future. I can just say, here's what's happening in our world. Here's what you don't know about it. I'm going to write a story in the part you don't know, and
Yep.
you'll understand it better by the time we're done.
Right.
Oh, so I feel like, particularly at my slow pace, that's relieved a lot of my anxiety of that.
Anxiety.
But
Yeah.
it still is a very real it still is a very real concern when you do think about the publishing angle because
Right.
yeah, there is a big chunk of the genre that is dedicated to that. What's over the horizon, and if
Yeah.
that's what you're wanting to write, you really can't wait for 5 years to get picked up because
No.
I don't know if anyone's noticed, but our world is changing rather rather dramatically here of late.
I don't think too many
Oh
people or I didn't read too many people predicting COVID, that's for sure. So once,
no, no.
when and that was I know a big thing when it was happening. In a lot of authors I talked to, it's like, okay, do we include this in our writing?
Yeah.
And do you have it's like, I don't think Mitch Rapp is going to be running around with a mask on,
I mean, it'd be a great way to defeat security cameras, but
It was weird walking in banks at that time period in life
oh yes.
when you had a
Oh
mask
yes.
on. You're like, I
Yeah.
should just bring a Glock, man. I mean, this could really work out well. So
It's the one weird trick the banks don't want you to know about.
I know exactly, but no, but yeah, from a fictional standpoint, some of those things happen, and you
Yeah.
a lot of things can be anticipated by people just paying attention, especially, and it's not knocking the United States. I love living here, but if you're only getting your worldview from whether it's Fox or CNN or NBC or CBS, you're getting such a watered down, narrowed version of what's going on in the world, probably even in the United States, but especially in the
Oh yeah.
world, that you've got to use outside sources to know, what's really happening in Ukraine, what's going on in Syria, what's the Yemen and stuff. I did a bunch of research for that for my fourth book, actually, the one that got published. I ended up just going to a brigadier general that I befriended and said, okay, hey, what's the deal here? Because I'm
Yeah.
getting too
Yeah.
much mixed information. And they were able to just give me the Cliff Notes version of this is what's going on. And I said, I don't need a lot of details for my book, but I want to reference it for a plot point.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like speaking to what you were saying, it's neat to start getting that Rolodex of contacts that are willing to share information with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you can
Yeah.
put realism in your book versus you don't have to make it all up.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes it's helpful just to have those people that are you're like, I would like to send you this scene and please tell me what's wrong with it. And then they come back with a list of, well, pretty much everything is. Oh,
Absolutely.
but yeah, that's always what's neat though when they can come back with, okay, here's some things you should change, here's stuff
Mhm.
that would be better if you did this, here's details maybe you should think about including, and you're like, okay, cool.
Right.
This is good.
And the
Oh,
cool thing about us getting to tell those stories is because of our backgrounds, we don't then have to have it vetted. We don't have to go
exactly.
through
Yeah.
the ringer of, and I
Yeah.
remember like years ago when Jack Carr was going through his I guess it was for the first book, first or second book, whatever. He was getting it back, was getting all these redacted pages or redacted
Yeah.
sections. It's like, well, what do you do with that? And what was crazy at the time, I interacted with him more, and he had even told me, he's like, that's all open. Like that's all those details in the book. You could go on Google and find none of those are classified. None of
but be
that's
but because he has the background to know details about them that are supposedly not supposed to be in the open, even though
right.
they are in the open, he's
Even though,
yeah,
yeah,
it's
it was interesting. I think one of his, speaking of him, I think one of his novels they had to push back. Maybe it was the third one. I don't remember now. Second or third, they had to push back the publication date
yeah.
because DOD was taking so long to basically, fact check his book, his fiction.
I've actually heard the DoD is worse than CIA in terms of the publication review. Oh,
They are. I
yeah.
know people. I know agency people. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which isn't it is interesting because on the one hand you look at that whole thing of, well, I this is all open source, surely I can talk about it. And on one hand it doesn't make any sense. On the other hand, when you think about it, someone with that background putting those details that are openly known in his writing is essentially saying those things are true.
Right.
So it's one of those weird things where it's like this makes no sense, and that once you kind of look at it from the a certain perspective, you're like, okay, there is a logic here.
There's a logic there. Yeah, absolutely.
I may not think it makes a lot of sense, but at the same time, it can kind of be seen as confirming things that maybe aren't
Yeah.
fully
Well,
confirmed to be true.
well, even some of the plot points of, some of those authors that we read, there are, and when I'm telling a story, sometimes if I delve into something that has a terrorism aspect, I think, because I'm trying not to just recreate the wheel, I'm trying to put a new spin on it. But then there's that part of you goes, if someone were to read this that was not a good person, am I giving them an idea of how to hit us?
I remember there was, which is again one reason why I'm kind of glad I don't have any kind of background that would actually give me
Right.
insider detail. I remember there was, I think it was in the afterword or author's note of one of Brad Taylor's books, where he was basically like, I wrote this manuscript and then realized I had written the perfect way to launch a terrorist attack on this U.S. military base, and I had to go back in and completely rewrite it for
Yep.
the version that's now in the book because what I wrote would have worked. And I'm like, yeah, there's some things I'm glad I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
It's yeah.
Yeah, Brad was one that I met early on in the process through going to Thriller Fest, and I used to go down to. I haven't gone recently, but I used to go down to his book events down in Charleston because it's not about
Gotcha.
3 hours. I'd go down a few times, and he gave me some great advice. And one of the things I was asking him one time about something, he was like, but it was about weapons, and he was just like,
Yeah.
just say gun. He's like, because if you don't, if you go specific, whether it be for the FBI or whatever, and it's not right, he's like, you're not going to enjoy the hate mail you get. He goes, I can put it in there and I can be right with it. And then people will
Mm,
still dog him. I know Mark Greaney sometimes has mentioned in a few of his interviews over the years that he gets, nasty grams from people, and he'll be like, "It was right. That's the right weapon.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
that." But someone says, "No, that's not what this unit used," and he's like, "No, I talked to guys in that unit. That's what they're using." So
I got a few emails after my first book came out. I got a few emails from people who were certain that I had made a typo in using the AK-74 in the book because they were like, "Well, it should have been the AK-47." And
AK-47, right,
I'm like, the AK-74 is also a thing. It's been a thing for 40
right,
plus years. Kalashnikov did not stop making firearms with in 1947.
right,
But
exactly.
yeah, it's just one of those things where yeah, you sometimes get very opinionated people who yeah, it's
So the advice
just don't
for
know what they're
authors out
talking
there
about.
that are hearing this, when you get those emails, just reply and say, "Thank you for your time. Thanks for responding. I appreciate you buying the book. I hope you'll buy the next one."
Pretty much, pretty
I'll
much. There's no
try to
point.
do better with the next one in the series, and you should really get everyone you know to buy that one as well and see if there's problems in that one. Actually, the more
Yes,
books you buy, maybe you'll find more issues. I mean,
that's true. They seem to bring joy to your heart. Therefore, you should keep buying
you've
them.
spent enough of your time here telling me how much I suck. So, this means something to you, apparently. Well,
Exactly.
what means something to me is you buying another book.
I mean, it's really at a point to it gets to a place of like sunk cost fallacy. I mean, you've invested all this time in telling me how wrong I am. Surely you want to do more of that.
Exactly. Exactly. It's kind of like, and I don't know, do
Uh,
you look at negative reviews on
I
Amazon?
do, yeah,
You
I
do.
do,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. I don't take them nearly as much to heart as I did back in 2013, but yes, I
When you're
did.
I glance
uh,
them every now and then. Mark Cameron was one. When the Body Man was coming out, I was interacting with Mark, and he said, "Okay, my two pieces of advice are: don't read your reviews on Amazon, and don't look at your sales numbers." Which, of course, I did both.
of
Um,
course, yes.
but
Why take good advice?
Exactly. But well, and they were fairly kind. Then there a few of the
Yeah,
negative ones I
yeah,
got really early on. Um, there was a couple that were legit. Okay, yeah, I did mess up there or whatever. Okay,
yeah,
that's and I respect that. But then a few of them, and there wasn't very many, but one of them I knew was just petty. And one of
yeah.
them, even a couple of the people I knew saw that one and they reached out to me. They're like, "Man, I want to throttle this person." And I'm like, "Yeah, but you don't get it. I don't care. I don't care what
Yeah,
you say about the book because
yeah,
guess what? I didn't write that book for that guy or that per whatever it
yeah,
was, that person. That's not who I wrote the book for. I wrote the book for me. I wanted to
yeah,
tell a story that I was going to enjoy. If other people enjoy that story, bonus points. That does bring me
yeah.
joy. But at the end of the day, if someone else doesn't like the story I told, here's the secret. It wasn't written for you anyway, so
Right,
pound
right.
sand. I don't care.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, you do occasionally find stuff in there that's like, yeah, okay, that's valid. I mean, I've probably the most frequent comment I get on my first book, frequent negative comment I get on my first book these days is just that the scenes are very short and it switches location and switches
Okay.
geography, so forth, quite a bit. And I'm like, I actually somebody commented on one of my Facebook ads like 2 weeks ago, just like I really liked the story and I enjoyed it, but man, it came across a bit choppy or whatever. I'm like, well, then you should keep reading the series because that changes.
That changed.
And I acknowledge, yeah, that was very much a flaw of that first book, but it is something that I've worked correct in subsequent
Mhm.
titles. And yeah, if you like the story, everything but that, keep reading,
I'll
buddy.
keep reading. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and
So
the power of a series and the power of experience too, because
yeah, oh yeah,
that's one thing. is the more you write, the more you, of course, read in the genre too. Just you end up changing, and you
Yeah,
should, because you're not going to have a successful series if how you wrote in the style and everything for the first book doesn't ever evolve in any way, shape, or form.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's if you're not growing as a writer, eventually that's going to take its own toll on you as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, because yeah, it's not the easiest gig in the world. So
No, no, definitely not. But again, it's something, and I've told people this is what I'm supposed to do. Making a living of it is a challenge. And I'm in a fortunate position too, where I have a really good 9 to 5 job. My boss is super supportive of what I do. He's the first
nice,
one in line buying my books when they come out. So I don't,
good stuff.
yeah, because I was writing years ago, long before I finished my first novel, and I had I was doing this job, and we took over a different company, and we had to move out to St. Louis for, not move, but we had to go to St. Louis for like 2 weeks at a time for a couple months. So we're living in these little town place suites, little, micro hotels with kitchens and stuff. Um and I was writing a lot at that point, but I wasn't finishing stuff. But I was
Yeah.
mid 20s. I was kind of getting my feet wet. I was learning what I was doing. I was trying to, be creative. But my boss at the time was like super negative about it. And
Mm.
and I was doing my job. It wasn't that I was just slacking off and not working. I was, but at night when other people would take work home with them, and I'd be like, I'm gonna write. This is my free time. I'm not getting paid for this.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
and she verbally like would dog it, like, you and your stupid
mm.
stories. And I'm just like, I get to have a life besides working for you. So
Yeah, yeah.
totally different situation. I will say the day I gave my 2 week notice, I was super excited. She was not super excited because I was moving across the country. So she's like, you knew more than 2 weeks out you were moving. And I was just like, I owed you 2 weeks, and that's what you got, lady.
Yep.
I'll give you for saying my stories are stupid. I'll be a well-known author one day, and I'm gonna
Yep.
name a bad character after you. And honestly, now that I just say that line, I cannot remember her name off the top of my head. So
Well,
that's a good
that's
thing.
tragic.
It'll come to
Oh,
me. It'll come to me at
yeah,
some point.
yeah.
It's probably in one of the stories already. I just, the Freudian slip happened, and I didn't realize I did it. So
Yeah, yeah,
no,
yeah.
of course I don't kill any people I know in stories, and I,
Definitely not. That never happens. No, never,
all
never.
it's all made up stuff. I actually booked
Yep.
so I actually sent a copy, an advanced copy of Breach of Trust to I ran probably too many contests when I was, because I started work on that book in 2021, I guess, 22. Yeah, in that 21, 22 time frame. And I was on social media a lot, and I was promoting the Body Man, and I was like, well, I'm writing these scenes, I might as well use real people. So I ran multiple contests to give
That's
away it, and I had the one contest that was the epic death that I'm going to give away. And actually a friend of mine got it, who she was a former Navy officer. And We've maintained friendship since I started writing the book, and back in the time. And I wrote what I thought, and I still think is like a really good. I tear up when I read the scene. I just read it like 3 weeks ago again, and so a while ago she had made a comment of, well, somehow I'm gonna have to read this, and you're gonna, because I said you're gonna cry, and she's like, I'm not gonna cry. And I'm like, no, you got it. Boy, then I'll be really feel like I failed you if I don't get you to cry. You're a mom. Come on, you gotta have tears in there somewhere. Brutal Navy officer. Come on, no. But so when I started the podcast, I'd reached out to her and I said, hey, I have an idea. In a few months when things are going and the book comes out, why don't I send you a copy of the book, except the chapter where I snuff you out, and we'll do a podcast episode, and you can
Mm.
read your death on the podcast. She loved the idea. So I mailed her a book about a week and a half ago. She's
Okay.
we haven't set up the time, and we've joked about it and talked about it. And I said, we'll film it. if it falls flat and oh my goodness, it's terrible, then we got the I have an editor, so we'll have a regular conversation about writing, and it might just be a shorter episode because we have to cut out the the 20 minutes of you not crying when I killed you. Um, but yeah, no, it was fun. It's fun to include those people and have those interactions and just the writing community in general, which I
Yeah.
assume you've found to be the case as well. Of it's such a great support system,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
and I didn't think it was going to be that. Not that I thought it would be negative when I started. You don't know what you don't know. I
Oh,
didn't
exactly.
I
Yeah.
didn't realize authors would be so supportive of other. I think probably at the time back in 14, 15, 16, around there when I was first really getting rolling and trying to get an agent and all that stuff and creating social media. I think as I look back on it, I probably thought authors would see another author as competition. And what I quickly realized is no, that might happen in a few instances here or there, maybe who sells the most books, but for most of us, we're not, I'm not like, man, if I don't make that, when Breach of Trust comes
Yeah.
out, it comes out the same day as Jack Carr's next book and Meg Gardner's next book. So
Who
I
do you
did
think
text.
is going to win that set of those three?
Well, I'm getting a dinner out of this because I texted Jack a while back because his date wasn't originally June 18th, his
Ah,
publication date. It got
okay.
moved, it got pushed back.
Gotcha.
And so once it got pushed back, I texted him and said, "Hey, we got the same publication date now, and you know the deal. Whoever sells the most books buys the other person dinner." So I got to find a good
Yeah,
place to
yeah,
go to dinner with Jack Carr at some point. So
yeah. Okay, yeah.
because
But yeah, I mean, I think. Go ahead.
no, I would say there's a high probability he's going to sell more books on June 18th. So
Very, very likely, yes.
yes.
But yeah, I mean, I think most authors who have been in the business any length of time realize that their readers read their book in about 3 days, and then they're off to they want another book to read.
Yep.
And even the ones that are publishing a book every 6 months, that math doesn't work out. So
Right. Exactly.
might as well promote other people and network and do your best to shove some more good books your readers' way, and they're lap it up. So
Have you done? I didn't look before I came on. I was looking at some of your background, but one thing I didn't look to notice is do you do Kindle Unlimited?
I do, yes. Yeah.
Do. And that was something that someone had pointed out to me last year, and that I didn't know much about. And it's turned out to be really, but just from a reader's perspective, what a great program for readers of, they can
Yeah.
pay a monthly fee and the authors are going to get something for it. So it's not
Oh
like,
yeah.
but I don't, I haven't looked in the last few days. Last I looked though, I think I was somewhere just shy of 400,000 page reads for the Body Man
Nice.
since the end of January, I think is when I put it on the
Very
program.
nice. Yeah. Yeah.
So, in a 3.5 month period, and I look at that and go, well, that's a lot of people. Because when I was first looking at it, I thought, okay, I was thinking about it in terms of, well, if someone pays a monthly fee, then I'm going to miss out because I'll make more money on selling an ebook if I just have them straight out. But I quickly realized, no, people that are going to pay a monthly fee, they might buy some ebooks, but very, very few. Why would you? You're paying a monthly
Yeah.
fee to get all these, not free, you're paying the fee. But
Right. But still, you
versus
can.
people that aren't doing it, they're the one buying the ebook. So it's
Yeah.
it's two separate markets you're going after.
Yeah. Very, very largely. And I've also found that the people who are in that program, I personally am not actually. I probably should look into that. A lot of the more technical stuff I'm interested in reading just isn't in there,
Isn't in there,
but
yeah.
still, yeah, I mean, the people who are in that program, they are the people who are going to sit down and read 15 books in a month. And there's ultimately there's no downside to reaching that audience and having those people that are voracious readers on your team. So,
Right.
yeah.
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 No, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's been a great. It's been, and again, it's those things of the business side that you have to learn, especially if you go the indie route.
Yeah.
And even now though, the thought of, well, if you're indie route, you're doing all the work, but if you get a big publisher, you're on easy street is
No,
100% false. I don't even care for the handful of big people that sign the
no.
seven-figure deals. They want a pound of flesh for that seven-figure deal, and that pound of flesh
Yeah.
isn't just write a story. They're going to want more out of you.
Yeah.
You're going to be doing
Yeah.
so.
I obviously have a completely outsider perspective when it comes to the trad pub world, but have friends in that, both
Mhm.
big publishers, small publishers, so forth. And from near as I can tell, the difference between trad publishing and indie publishing, both of them are going to require that you do a lot of the work yourself.
Yeah.
You just have to you just on the indie side of things, you have a somewhat you're somewhat less visible. You also keep all the money.
Right.
So there's definitely some trade-offs. I mean, you definitely have some degree of um still a threshold with people of, oh, this book isn't actually published by a real publisher.
Right.
I really think that exists more in the industry now than it does in the reader community.
I think so as
Be,
well.
because I've seen some things where I'm like, okay, this person I can see their rankings and so forth, and they're not selling probably a tenth of what I'm selling, but
Mhm.
they're being asked to speak here, asked to speak there, so forth and so on, being kind of given the credibility of an author, as it
Right.
were. But I'm like, okay, but what is that actually worth at the end of the day? I
Right.
mean, a lot of people really like having those trappings, but
Mhm.
they don't really they don't get your book in front of more readers, and
No.
they don't actually make you a successful author.
Yeah.
Oh,
I know multiple people, just because I've been interacting now for past 6, 7 years with quite a lot of authors, and I know multiple like legit, really authors that have written good books that they not getting published. They have an agent.
yeah,
They've had an agent
yeah,
for 4 or 5 years. A couple of them,
yeah,
and the agent can't sell the manuscript. And a couple of those manuscripts I've read, and I'm like, yeah, it's a good book. It's just as good as Joe Blow's book here that's on the bestseller
yeah,
list. It's no
yeah,
different. It's just a different character, different setting,
right, yeah,
but so at some point, people have to ask themselves, do I want an agent or do I want to publish books? And there will be there will be a time period where that's not going to be the same thing.
yeah,
So you decide. And there's also, and I totally respect, because I was there for a while where for years I didn't have the resources to self-publish, or well, I didn't have the resource to self-publish the right way, because
right,
anyone can self-publish now with Amazon KDP, and I've told this story to other, another podcast of, if I really wanted to, in the next, we'll just say in the next month, I could put together a half-ass book. Give it 6 weeks. 6 weeks, I could put together a half-ass book, and I could go to Canva, I could create a cover, I could do
please
everything
don't.
I need to do, and I could publish it. I would be
Yeah,
a published author. It's going to be not a good story. It's not going to be professionally edited. I'm not going to have a good cover. I'm not going to have all those things that
yeah,
make people go, "Oh, self-published. This I can tell this is
yeah,
self-published."
yeah,
But
yeah,
give me time, I can write a good story. I've now built myself a following, and I've also built a Rolodex list of, I put everything through a legal entity. I hire a professional cover guy. I hire a professional
yeah,
editor. So I stay in my lane and do my parts of the business, and my part, especially being the writing, but everything else that I can outsource out, I do. And that's where it's really my only difference besides myself in traditionally published, some traditionally published authors, is locations of where they can get my book. I don't have the
yeah.
distribution. It's the only thing I'm
You're
missing.
right,
Everything
exactly.
else you can pay for and you can get.
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
and that, of course, then you have to have the money to be able to pay for it. But you'll
right.
get like you mentioned a few minutes ago, you'll get 100% of the royalties back versus, with me going through a small publisher, I didn't know if my deal was good or bad, and I talked to some authors and like, "No, that's pretty standard." Pretty crappy when they saw how much
Yeah.
money I was making for books. Um,
Yeah,
but I wasn't having to shell anything out. So that's where I started
right.
to
Yeah,
understand the business of,
yeah,
okay, the publisher's paying for the cover, the publisher's paying for the editor, for marketing to some degree at least, although I paid for the
yeah,
marketing myself, on my own. Um,
yeah.
but getting back the rewards for that was extremely minimal compared to now. If I really push hard, if I put out a good product, and if I get the right people on board to help with the parts I shouldn't be doing, I have the ability to recoup my money and make more. basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yep. It's a brave new world out there.
It is a brave new world. And I don't, where is it going to be in 5 or 10 years? I don't know. Maybe, AI might be doing all this stuff for us. This might be two AI characters talking about the industry and how much it sucks or doesn't suck, and it's not real.
who who is to say that's not what it is right now? Do either of us really exist?
The Matrix might be real. Definitely. Definitely. Okay, so you mentioned earlier, so you've got book 13 is being worked on now?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And so your last one was Soon
The,
Dies the Day? Or no, that's not,
yes.
am I missing one?
No, you're
Okay.
right. Yeah, that was the I published that last summer, and
Last summer. Okay.
this one's not going to be ready this summer, but so in the not too distant future. Taking my characters to Malaysian Borneo. So we're
Nice.
they're heading there to intercept NSA contractor gone walkabout, and
Okay.
he's in Borneo meeting up with some contacts he should not be meeting up with, and they're to retrieve him. So,
Love it. Love it.
but along the way, I've been enjoying the research and have figured out a way to work in a unit of Borneo tribesmen who fought for the British during the Malaya emergency and may or may not have taken a few heads in that effort. Figured out a way
Okay.
to work them into the story. So
Nice.
we're as always, cribbing from real life and not getting sued for it. So,
That's always good. Yeah, I have one story I started a while. I didn't start the story. An idea I had for one of my characters when I was writing my early series that didn't get published. And I had this really great idea and I put the synopsis down and I just, you need a reason to be hungry. You need a reason to
oh
push
yeah,
yourself, I think. And for me, for that particular story, it took place in an island in the South Pacific. I've told very few people the name of the island. I'm keeping it to myself. But I made a vow when I was coming up with the idea of like I could sit on my couch, which is right across from where we're talking, and I could write that story, and I could write a really good story. It would take me many many months, but I could in the evenings working when I'm not have my kids or not doing my day job. But I just decided that story, whether I tell the whole story or at least get it started, I'm going to that island. That's the
nice.
juice to keep me going of going, you need to bust your butt pretty hard because that's not a cheap flight. And you're
Yeah,
either taking off a chunk of period from work, which my boss who supports me might not like, or made I've done well enough with it that that is my
right.
occupation to be a writer. And then I can
Yeah,
sit on that beach, even if I just throw up a tent, a Kelty tent for, a couple months until the natives kick me out. But no, it's just you need reasons to do it. And
yeah,
I love the fact that we can challenge ourselves and we can give ourselves goals. And that's how you achieve your goals. You don't achieve them by
yeah,
going, maybe it'll happen or maybe I'll try to do that. And that's the big difference. People. I saw one of your blurbs or one of your early blurbs. I think was from Brad Thor, and
yes, yes. Talk about a gracious community. Yes.
yeah, 100%. And he said something years ago, and I don't even know if he made it up, but it was something that I attribute to him because I heard him say it was the only difference between a published author and an unpublished author is the published author didn't quit. And I've tried
Yeah,
to remind people of that over the years of, look, yes, there's magic in the sense of you're either a storyteller or you're not. I don't think it's something you can just completely concoct if you have no imagination. You can't force it.
no,
But if you do have the creativity in you, well, what's the difference between you and the Brad Thors of the world or the Jack Carrs of the world or the Brad Taylors? Yes, there's differences in their backgrounds that can be used by the publishing industry to sell more books and all that. But ultimately what it comes down to is you stick to what you want to do and you keep going. And if that door
yeah,
closes, you open another door. You find a way to make that door open. You don't give up. And maybe you get to a point where you don't want to do it anymore. Okay, well, there's no harm and there's nothing wrong in then saying, hey, I tried really hard. I wrote 10 novels. None of them hit the New York Times bestseller list. I didn't get to fly to that island to film to write my story, but you tried your best, and that's
Yeah,
what you
yeah.
have to that's what you have to do, because if you don't try your best, if you don't give it what you have, you're just going to be sitting on your couch watching Netflix on some island, go, hey, that's the island I want to put a story in. Well, guess what,
Yeah.
dummy? You don't do that by sitting on your couch, not doing your work.
Yep. Yep. Perseverance.
Perseverance. That's the magic sauce to success. I don't care what your
Yeah.
industry is. So,
Yeah. Sure is.
well, we're going to end this on a good note, but on more of a thoughtful note. This is how you haven't seen it. So you dropped the ball earlier and said you hadn't seen any other episodes. So you don't know how I end every episode. I end it with
All
the same
right.
question. So I think you'd agree with me that life really is like a book. Clearly, all of us have a first page and we're gonna have a last page. We don't know how many pages are in between that book, but Stephen England, you are a writer. So if you get to write your last page, what would you want that last page to say?
Hmm.
Softball for you to end this. Come on.
uh, well, I think back on I think I probably think back on what I would say about like either of well one of them still living, the other's passed on, but I think of my grandfather who's passed on, and I think of how I remember him as a very a great father, great grandfather, very godly man, good husband. And yeah, I really think if I reached the end of my life and people could say all those things about me, I think I'd die content. So
Yeah, the last page went well then.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for coming on. And
Thanks
where
for
is the
having
best
me.
place for people to find you and to go out and buy your books?
So you can find me on Facebook, on Twitter, Stephen England. You can go to my website, stephenenglandbooks.com, and yeah, all my stuff is there. So yeah,
Thank you for
thanks
coming
for
on,
having me
Stephen.
on, Eric. This has been a pleasure.
I appreciate it. Have a great night.
You as well.